Thanks, Sabrina. Let me
Of
on.
course.
Yeah. So give me a second. Yeah. Okay. So thanks everyone for joining the session. And today we will going to talk about how to manage and secure the MuleSoft and the non-MuleSoft API using the Anypoint Flex Gateway. So that is the topic we will going to discuss. So let me introduce myself. Basically, I am Jitendra Bafna, and I'm working as a senior solution architect at a EPAM Systems. I'm a MuleSoft ambassador, speaker, and the meetup leader. I'm a MuleSoft delivery and the go-to-market champion. I am pursuing the MBA. I'm pursuing a Master of Science in Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence. I have recently achieved a certification in the digital transformation and the innovation from the Indian Institute of Management. I am MCPA and MCI certified. I have expertise in setting up MuleSoft platforms like RTF, CloudHub 1.0, CloudHub 2.0, Flex Gateways. That's all about me. So agenda, we will going to discuss about what's a Flex Gateway, what are the different Flex Gateway design pattern. I will also going through one of the architecture which I have implemented recently for the Flex Gateway. What are the Flex Gateway benefits and the limitations? Okay. So before I go into Flex Gateway, I will just introduce why we need a Flex Gateway. As my friend Ashish Pardi already explained in the last session, what is the universal API management? Basically, he has already explained why we require the universal API management. So Flex Gateway is also one of the major component of the universal API management, basically. So for example, like most of the organization is adopting the digital transformation, right? And they are using API as like API is one of assets for their digital transformation, basically, right? So generally organization have a lot of API already available as a part of digital transformation. They might be writing more and more APIs, right? So it will just add the complexity to your application network, basically. Now how to manage all those API with a single platform, right? So where the universal API management concept is very important. So with universal API management, you can manage all your non-MuleSoft as well as MuleSoft API from the single pane of the glass. So you have an Anypoint platform. So from Anypoint platform, you can manage, you can secure, you can govern, you can engage your APIs. Doesn't matter whether it's a MuleSoft API or it's non-MuleSoft API. Where those APIs are deployed, it can be deployed on the cloud, it can be deployed on the on-premises, it can be running on the Tomcat server, it can be running anywhere, basically, anywhere universally, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of architecture it is following, right? It can be the API led connectivity architecture, it can be microservices architecture, it can be monolithic architecture, right? So you can manage all type of API using the single pane of glass. That's an Anypoint platform, basically, right? So let me talk about the Flex Gateway. So Flex Gateway also a major component of the universal API management. So Flex Gateway is a basically it's a one of the fastest API gateway, basically, which is used to manage the API running anywhere, basically. Like as I mentioned, you can manage your API running anywhere. It can be on premises, cloud hub, like anywhere, basically, and it can follow any kind of architecture, right? And like monolithic, microservices, anything, basically. So this Flex Gateway is like Envoy based. So Envoy is one of the high performance service, low latency, and it's a very fast service till now, basically. And the Envoy is like CNCF project, right? So there are few features of Flex Gateway. You can secure and manage your API located or deployed anywhere universally. You can extend your Anypoint platform capabilities like API policies, like API analytics to the MuleSoft as well as non-MuleSoft API. Right? You can enable the security and the governance for any type of API. Right? And like you can easily integrate your Flex Gateway with CI/CD pipeline. So you have an Anypoint CLI version 4 that can be used to set up to register the Flex Gateway automatically, basically. You can set up the Flex Gateway in two different mode. It can be local mode or it can be the connected mode. So we will going to talk about the local mode and the connected mode in the next slides. So where we can set up a Flex Gateway. The Flex Gateway can be set up on the Docker container. It can be set up on the virtual machine. It can be set up on the OpenShift, and it can be used as an ingress controller on the Kubernetes, right? So for Linux, it support a few operating system: Amazon Linux 2, CentOS 8, Debian, Red Hat, and Ubuntu. So these are the Linux operating systems supported by the Flex Gateway. Currently, Flex Gateway cannot be set up on the Windows operating system, but there's a workaround. You can set up the Flex Gateway on Windows operating system. Like you can set up the Docker container or Docker on your Windows operating system, and you can set up your Flex Gateway within that Docker, basically. So there are, as I mentioned, there are two modes in which you set up the Flex Gateway. One is the connected mode, and other is the local mode. So when you set up the Flex Gateway in the connected mode, right? So your Flex Gateway is always connected with the Anypoint platform. So whenever you create a Flex Gateway, right? So it will also create, or it will also register the instance in your Anypoint platform. So basically, you can see your Flex Gateway in the Anypoint platform. You can apply the policy from the Anypoint platform. You can see all kind of analytics, all like you can govern your API from the Anypoint platform basically. In local mode, like you have to use the YAML descriptor file basically. So first time whenever you register the Flex Gateway, right, that particular Flex Gateway will be not visible in the Anypoint platform, right? So it will not going to send any data from your Flex Gateway to the Anypoint platform, right? Any metadata. You cannot able to see any metrics, or even you cannot apply the policy from the Anypoint platform basically, right? So if you want to apply any policies, if you want to do any changes in your Flex Gateway in the local mode, you have to update the YAML descriptor file. So with each Flex Gateway, there's a one YAML descriptor file, right? So if you want to set up any routing, right, so you have to update that particular YAML descriptor file. If you want to apply any policy, or you have to update that YAML descriptor file, right? So that is how you manage your local mode Flex Gateway. So this is how Flex Gateway looks in the connected mode. So if you see in connected mode, your Flex Gateway is always connected to the Anypoint platform, and it can leverage all out-of-box capability like a runtime manager, where you can see the Flex Gateway status, like how many replicas for this particular Flex Gateway is running. You can add the API instances, you can add the policies. You can also see like you can also use the API manager basically, right? You can, and you can also make use of the out-of-box Anypoint monitoring, visualization, everything, like all the out of box capability can be used with the when you register the Flex Gateway in the connected mode. In local mode, as I mentioned, we need to keep updating the YAML descriptor file. If you want to do any changes, if you want to publish any API to the Flex Gateway, you have to go and update your YAML descriptor file. And if you want to apply any new policies, right, so you have to update your YAML descriptor file. You may require, like, you may require basically third-party APIs or any third-party monitoring tool or third-party logging tool, for monitoring and the logging purpose, basically. Yeah. But your question is, even you are setting up your Flex Gateway in the local mode or Flex Gateway in the connected mode, right? It is always a customer hosted. Your Flex Gateway is always customer hosted, right? You are responsible for maintaining the infrastructure, managing the infrastructure, creating the infrastructure. That is your responsibility. So MuleSoft will provide the Flex Gateway, right? You can you can like create that particular Flex Gateway, right, on your own infrastructure, right? So the infrastructure will not provided by the MuleSoft. It's your responsibility. Let it the Flex Gateway in the connected mode or the local mode. You have to set up your own infrastructure. So there are four different Flex Gateway design pattern. So standalone deployment, ingress deployment, egress deployment, and the sidecar deployment. So there are various design patterns supported by the Flex Gateway. Let's go by one by one. So for standalone deployment model. So if you see in standalone deployment model, we are setting up the Flex Gateway in the organization own network, which I mentioned, like whatever what you have to set up the Flex Gateway in your own network basically, and like you are securing all your internal API, and that particular Flex Gateway is in the connected mode. So if you see, it is connected to your Anypoint platform, and internal consumer applications, right, can call this particular Flex Gateway, and that Flex Gateway can route your request to the particular APIs basically, right? So that is for like internal APIs communication. So you can use the standalone deployment model. And now just let me go to next slide. That is the ingress deployment model. So in ingress deployment model, what you do, like you set up a network load balancer or L4 load balancer, which is known as ingress load balancer in the front of Flex Gateway. So any external consumer want to call your API, so they can call this particular that ingress load balancer, and ingress load balancer will send the request to the Flex Gateway, and Flex Gateway all authorization and everything has been taken care at a Flex Gateway level, and then the request will forward to the internal APIs basically, right? So what is here only difference, like if you want to give the access to the external user or like right, so you may have to set up the load balancer in between your consumer application and the Flex Gateway. So this is the second design pattern for the Flex Gateway. I will go with the egress deployment model also. So there might be chances like where like you may have to connect the external APIs, right? So those external API can be connected via Flex Gateway basically. So you can set up the route on the Flex gateway, and that Flex gateway will be connecting to some external API. So here we are just instead of calling the API directly from the consumer application, we are routing the request to the Flex gateway basically. So Flex gateway will ensure that the request is coming from secure consumer basically, and it is just sent to the external application securely. Those kind of things can be taken care at a Flex gateway in the egress deployment model. Then we have a sidecar deployment model. It is one of the complex model basically. So where what we are doing, we are setting up the Flex gateway for each API. So you have API 1, so we will create the Flex gateway instance for API 1. If you are deploying new API, so we are setting up the Flex gateway for API 2 basically. So if you have 100 API, so for each and every API you have a one Flex gateway basically. So this particular architecture comes from the service mesh architecture. In service mesh, we have a concept called sidecar, right? So where each API have a sidecar. So basically, sidecar is taking care of all the security aspects, basically, right? So same thing, like here, Flex Gateway will take care of all the security aspects, basically, all the and it will make sure the request is coming from the secure consumer and sent to the particular APIs, basically, right? So this is also one of the architecture, but it had a lot of complexity, so your in the Kubernetes architecture, your API and generally Flex Gateway are in the same container or in the same pod, basically. But if you see, if your number of APIs is growing, your number of Flex Gateways keep growing, basically, right? So the other thing, you can also do one thing, you can group your API. So like for this particular 10 API, I can set up one Flex Gateway. For this particular 10 API, I can set up one Flex Gateway. Or in layer architecture, you can do for process API, you can have one Flex Gateway. For system API, you can have one Flex Gateway. For experience API, you can have one Flex Gateway, right? So there are various other patterns also. These are the 4 important patterns I discussed. But yeah, depending on the organization requirement, you can set up your own, Flex Gateway design pattern, basically. So these are the common design pattern used by the Flex Gateway. So maybe you have a single Flex Gateway which is managing all the MuleSoft and the non-MuleSoft API application. So you have a Spring Boot based API, you have a Node.js based API, you have a .NET API, and you have a Mule API, right? So we have a single Flex Gateway which is managing all this API. So for high availability, what we are doing, we are the multiple instance of your single Flex Gateway. So multiple replicas of your single Flex Gateway. This will ensure the high availability. So there are other features like auto scaling, is supported by Flex Gateway, where you can define if my CPU or memory utilization is greater than 80%, right? It can add more and more replicas. So maximum replica, it can go up to the 11, and minimum it can go up to 2, right? So by the default value of auto scaling, the mean replica equals to 2 and the max replica equals to 8. So this is one of the architecture where we can have a single Flex Gateway and the multiple APIs. Now we can have a multiple Flex Gateway, and you can make the Flex Gateway to act as a micro gateway. So for each technology, or for Mule API, I can have a one Flex Gateway. For Spring Boot based API, I can have a one Flex Gateway. For Node.js, I can have a one Flex Gateway. For .NET API, I can have a one Flex Gateway, basically, right? But apart from that, in your organization, you might be having the multiple line of business, right? For each line of business, you can create a separate Flex Gateway. That is also one of the design pattern. As I mentioned, in API-led connectivity architecture, you can set up the 3 Flex Gateway, one for system, one for process, and one for experience, right? So basically each Flex Gateway can have its own security consideration. Or if you want to restrict anything, if you want to restrict public traffic on the system API, so you can restrict at the Flex Gateway level only. So you can set up the Flex Gateway as a standalone Flex Gateway. For for experience API, if you want to allow the public traffic, you can set up as an ingress design pattern, right? Which we have discussed in the last few other slides, basically. So now Flex Gateway support 2 kinds of routing. So like on Flex Gateway, you can publish as many API you want, basically, right? So it support port-based routing. In port-based routing, whenever you publish a new API, you have to set up a new port, basically. You have to open a new port. For example, I deployed the employee API, which is running in Docker container, right? And I want to enable the Flex. I want to publish this to open the 8081 port on the Flex Gateway. So whenever traffic come to on port 8081, it will route to the employee API, which is running on port 9000. In same way, we can have a 8082 for order API, 8083 for the health API. So 808, whenever request come to 8082, it will route to order API running on 9002. Whenever the request come to 8083, it will route the request to health API, which is running on 9003. So I think this is not that good approach where, like, if you have 1,000 API, we need to open the 1,000 ports, right? So we have other approach, a path-based routing. Instead of defining, you can have a single port, the Flex API, which is running on 8081, and we can define a path basically. For employee API, we have something path called employee/API, right? Which is route the request to employee API. Similar orders, I have one API which is route the request to order API. Then health API, which is route the request to. So request will come on port 8081 with the path/employee API will be route to the employee API basically, which is running on the 9000. In same way, it will route the request to order API and the health API, right? So now question like how to set up a Flex gateway using Anypoint CLI basically. So there are a few steps like, so basically you can set up the Anypoint CLI. And once you have set up the Anypoint CLI, you can register the Flex gateway. So whenever you register your Flex gateway, right, you can register in the local mode. So it will generate a registration.yaml file. So that file is important, and like you need to save that particular file for the future use also. Then, like once you register it, it generates the registration.yaml file. You have to run the Flex gateway. Once you run the Flex gateway, you can create the API instance, right? For creating the API instance also, you require that registration.yaml file basically. So with registration.yaml file, it will create the API instance on that particular Flex gateway only. Then you can apply the API policy. Then you can deploy the API instance. And then finally, you can validate whether the API instance deployed or not, right? So these are the 7 steps. In future, if you want to publish more API, right, you have to skip the first, second, and third step. You don't have to go through. Once you run the Flex gateway, you can directly start with the step 4, right? You already have a registration.yaml, so you can use that particular registration.yaml to publish more and more API to the Flex gateway. So this is one of the complex architecture which we have implemented, like for one of the customer basically. So what happened, so generally what we have done, the runtime fabric manager and the Flex gateway are running on the same AWS EKS cluster. So we have a elastic Kubernetes services where we have a runtime fabric, RTF is already running. So RTF is a self-managed Kubernetes, right? So the two blocks, right? This RTF ingress and this particular kubectl, like this NGI and export, right? These are already available, right? So now what is happening whenever I deploy my application, to enable the API, to connect with the API instance, I have to use the API auto discovery basically, right? So that particular, my organization like have a lot of API which is running on the RTF. They have a lot of other APIs written in Java. They are running on the other Kubernetes cluster. So what we have decided, like why we don't set up a Flex gateway on the same EKS where the RTF is running. So we have set up a Flex gateway with the mean replicas of 2 and with the max replicas of 3. Yeah, just a 1 minute. I will just finish it off.
Jitendra, you have another 1 minute to wrap up the session. We have
a couple of questions. Yeah. I will finish it. Yeah. So basically, like, you have a Flex gateway. So we have set up the Flex gateway on the same EKS cluster, and we have set up the load balancer basically. So what is happening? The request is coming from load balancer to the NGINX pod for the Flex gateway, and that request is forward to the RTF basically. And we have used whatever the ingress on the top of RTF, that is for the internal request, and the application load balancer, which is for the Flex gateway for the external use basically. Yeah, there are few Flex gateway benefits. So you can manage all your.
Sorry, actually, we passed.
Sorry, Ravi, he's fine. I've been trying. I was too late. Jitendra, you can take a couple more minutes.
It's 2 slides. Yeah. So basically the Flex gateway benefits, like you can manage all your APIs with a single platform under the single pane of glass basically. As I mentioned, you can extend your MuleSoft or Anypoint platform capabilities to Mule and the non-Mule API. You can secure, you can discover, you can manage, you can engage your MuleSoft and the non-MuleSoft API basically. Like you can use all API Experience Hub, Anypoint Community Manager, a developer portal for API catalog also. You can adapt, basically it can adapt any kind of architecture, right? So which I mentioned, it can adapt monolithic kind of architecture, microservices, API-led connectivity, any kind of architecture, right? There are few limitations, like per Flex gateway, you can publish up to 400 APIs, and organization basically is responsible for managing and securing the underlying infrastructure for the Flex gateway. So you have to manage all the infrastructure and everything, MuleSoft will provide a Flex gateway to you, but the infrastructure management has to be done by you. Yeah, thank you. Any question?
Yes, Chandra, we have a couple of questions posted. There are 2, 3 questions. There is one question from Justin saying that is Flex Gateway is available in government cloud or not?
I don't know about the government cloud, but it is available in the Europe
Control in the US control plane. I am not sure whether it's available. I will get the answer for you basically. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chandra. Another question from Sarika saying, um, can we say that Flex Gateway is like an Congo or APZ?
I will like I will like I it's see Flex gateway is simply like I will not compare with any other product. It's a simply gateway, right? So basically like if you want to manage your API lifecycle, right? So you have a lot of APIs. If you want to manage your API lifecycle, like from designing to like securing, managing, right? You can do with a Flex gateway basically. For example, I will give one typical example. So generally, whenever we don't have a Flex gateway, what we are doing for managing non-MuleSoft API, we are creating the API proxy, right, for each and every API, right? With Flex gateway, you can avoid that. You don't have to create the API proxy. You can simply publish your API to the Flex gateway, your non-MuleSoft API, like written in Java or Spring Boot or any other technology, basically, right? Yeah, you can say it's a similar to Kong, basically, right? Where you can it's a gateway basically. It's not a runtime manager, or it doesn't provide Mule runtime or anything. It's just a gateway like Kong you mentioned correctly. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jitendra. And there is another question from Jay saying that when you apply these Flex Gateways, how you manage the policies? Are you going to apply individual? Are you going to use any point platform like that? He's asking.
Yeah.
See, in connected mode, you can definitely use your anypoint platform.
See, simply like whenever, like it's simply take the example on Mule Gateway. You just simply your API policy on the Mule Gateway, right? Same way you can just apply the policy to your API instance in the Flex Gateway also. But there's a one limitation with the Flex Gateway. You cannot apply the custom policy. Whatever custom policy you have written, right? Already you have written, that cannot be applied to your API instance. But if you write your custom policy in Rust language, right? Rust Rust language, then you can apply those custom policies also.
Okay, thanks, Jitendra. And there is another last question from Sachidharan saying, by using the Flex Gateway, is it going to cost the V cores, or is it going to be separate entitlement alone?
So as I mentioned, right? So when we are deploying the proxy, it is taking some kind of V core, like minimum 0.1 V core, basically, right? With Flex Gateway, no, like you don't have to allocate the V core to API instance, basically, right? So as I mentioned, infrastructure management is your responsibility. How many core CPU you take, it's up to you, basically, right? But like when we are publishing any API to your Flex Gateway, you don't allocate any V cores to that, basically.
Yeah, Jitendra. And those are the questions actually. Anyhow, there is another question saying that definitely this recording will be available. After that, you can watch later. Yeah. These are the questions, Jitendra. But thank you very much for your wonderful session.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a
Thank you
nice
all.
day. Bye bye.
Thank you all.